Hello everyone, my name's Ryan King and welcome to this Blender tutorial where I'm going to show you how to create this Planck Tower physics battle in Blender. So recently on my YouTube channel I posted a Planck Tower physics battles Blender animation, and in the comments I got quite a few requests to make a tutorial on how to do it. So I decided to make a tutorial. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create this animation right here from start to finish in Blender. And also, if you haven't seen my Planck Tower physics battles video, you can check it out with the card up on the screen and the link in the video description. And if you'd like to purchase the project files for this tutorial, then you can get that over on my Gumroad and my Patreon, and that'll also be a great way to help support this YouTube channel. And then one last thing before we start, this video was brought to you by my Martian Environment Blender course. So I've created a 7-part Blender tutorial series where I'll show you step by step in real time how to create this Martian environment right here. And purchasing the course is also a really great way to help support me and this YouTube channel. So I'll have a link to the trailer video if you'd like to check it out, and then I'll also have a link in the description to the course on my Gumroad store if you'd like to purchase. Alright, so let's get started. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and also let me turn on my screencast keys so that you can see what buttons I'm pressing right there in the corner. So I'm going to start by just selecting this lamp here and deleting it because I don't need it, and then I'm going to select the cube, and we are going to actually be using the default cube. So you can model your planks however you like, but I'm going to show you how I like to model my planks. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then I'll press S to scale, and then I'll press X to scale it on the X axis, and I'm going to type in 5, enter, and then I'll just tab back into object mode. So this is how I like to model my planks, just really simple, but you can model them however you like. Now I'm also going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a plane because we need a ground plane so that when we do the simulation the planks can fall on the ground. So I'll press S to scale, and I'm going to type in 100, enter, and then you can see that's pretty big, but I do want it to be even bigger, so I'll press S to scale again, and then we're going to type in 10, enter, and now we have this really big plane, and so it just kind of goes back into the background, and that is exactly what I want. Now I need to move this up because you can see that the plank is going through the ground, but what I want to do first is I want to turn on this snapping right here. So you can click on this snapping, the button is a magnet, the little icon there is a magnet. So you can see now when I move this, it's moving by increments, and this is very important because I want all the planks to be right next to each other, but I don't want them to go through each other. So we're basically using this grid here. There's basically a grid in the 3D space, and all of the objects will now move by increments. So I can now press G to grab, Z on the Z axis, and we are just going to move this up just like that. So just make sure that this plank is sitting right on the plane. So now what I want to do is I want to add the rigid body physics. So I'm going to click right over here to the physics properties, and then I want to turn on rigid body. So now I'm going to press 7 on the numpad, and that is going to take us to top view, and then I'm also going to press Z and move my mouse over and let go to go into the wireframe view. I can now press G to grab and then Y on the Y axis, and I'm just going to bring it over something like that, and then I'll press Shift D and bring it over, and you can see it's moving by increments, so it's moving along that grid there. So I'm going to move this one kind of right here, and then I think I need to move this one over, and then what I want to do is duplicate these and rotate them over. So I'm going to shift and select this one, so we have both of these selected, and I'll now press Shift D, and Shift D will duplicate them, and then immediately after that I'm going to press R to rotate, and then I want to type in 90 and enter just to rotate it over by 90 degrees. Now if you didn't get the placement of them exactly correct, you can just select them and press G to grab and just kind of move them around so that they're exactly the same, so that it's a square. Now you can see that these planks are going through each other, so I'm going to shift click on both of these, and then I'll just press G and Z, just bring it up just like that. So now these are just placed on top of each other. So now I just want to duplicate these and move them up. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select all of them, and then I'll press Shift D, Z, and we're just going to bring that up and then just click to place that. So because we've duplicated them and moved them up in one movement, I can now press Shift R, and Shift R is going to repeat the last action. So I can now just bring this way up, just make it as high as you want, something like that is pretty good. So now what I want to do is I want to make this flat here, here, and that way when we create those little cannons, we can stick them onto the tower. So I'm going to click on this, shift click on this, and we want to join these together into one object. So I'm going to press Control J, and Control J will join these together. So if I tab in edit mode now, we just need to fill this so there's just one big plank. So I'm going to press 3 or click right up here to the face select, and I'm going to shift select these two inner faces, and then I can press X to delete, and I want to delete faces. So now I want to kind of push these together. So I'm going to press 1 or just click right here to the vertex select, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and then select this ring of vertices, and then hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this ring of vertices. So I can now press S to scale, and I want to press X to scale it on the X axis, and then I want to press 0 and enter, and that way they just get pushed together. And then also we now have overlapping vertices, so to get rid of the overlapping vertices, I can press M. This is going to bring up the merge settings, and I want to click on by distance, and that way it's going to remove 4 vertices, so now there aren't any overlapping vertices. Now I actually don't really want this in here because we don't need this extra loop, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select this ring of vertices in the middle, and I want to click on X to delete, and then to just delete the ring of vertices, I can click on dissolve edges, and that'll just get rid of it. All right, so there we go. Now you can see that the origin point is a bit messed up because the origin point isn't in the very center, and this can actually mess up the rigid body physics later on in the video. So I'm just going to make sure this is selected, and then I'm going to click on object, and I want to click on set origin, and then I'm going to click on origin to geometry, and that way the origin point is in the very center. All right, so that is very good. So I now want to just duplicate these and kind of move them over so that it's a little bit longer. So I'm going to press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I can just press Z and move your mouse over to go into the wireframe view. And then also this camera, I can just kind of move it back here. So I now just want to box select all the planks, and I can now press Shift D and move over, click to place that, Shift D, and then move it over, and then click to place that. So of course you can create your tower however you want. You could create a giant tower with all these flags, and you could create this giant fortress, whatever you want to do. Because this is a tutorial, I'm just gonna make a simple tower, but of course you can create any tower that you want. All right, so that is the first tower. So now I'm going to box select this again, and I want to move it over. So I'm gonna press G to grab, click and hold with my mouse wheel to constrain it on the Y axis, and I'm just gonna bring it back. Something like that, and then I'll press Shift D and then click and hold with my mouse wheel and just kind of bring this over just like that. So now let's place the camera somewhere around here, kind of on the side. So I'm just going to move my view to where I want the camera to be, and then I can press Control Alt 0, Control Alt numpad 0, and that is going to hop the camera to where we are. Now you can see that the camera actually isn't able to see very far into the scene, and that is because this is such a large scene that the camera is starting to clip. So what we need to do is just select the camera, and we can also scale the camera out, scale the camera up so it's a little bit bigger. And then to make the camera so it can see farther, let's click right over here on the camera settings, make sure the camera is selected, and then click on the camera settings. And I'm going to go right here to the end. So right now it's set to 100. I'm going to add an extra 0 right here, so that way it can see 1,000. So now if you look through the camera, you're able to see all the way to the end. So I can now select the camera, and I can press G to grab, and then I can also press G and double tap the Z key, and that is going to bring it in and out, and I can just bring it over, something like that. All right, so that is very good. And then also we don't really need this on anymore, the snapping feature. So I'm going to click on this to turn it off, and that way it won't use the snapping and the movements will be smoother. And then also I haven't saved this project yet. So let's click on File and then click on Save As. And I'll just save this as tutorial.blend in a folder on my computer, and you can just click on Save As. All right, so before we model the cannons, I want to just set up some basic lighting and some basic materials. So I'm going to click right over here on the world properties, and then the color here, I want to click on the yellow thing right here, and I'm going to change this to a sky texture, and then we can just go up into the rendered view to preview this. Now it's way too bright right now, and there's a few things that I want to change. So I'm going to turn off the sun disk, and then also right here I'm going to change this to this one right here in the middle, and I do think this one looks a bit nicer. And then it is pretty dim, so on the strength value I'm going to change this to 3 so it's a bit brighter. All right, so that is definitely looking better, but I also want to add a main light, so I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here to light, and I'm going to add a sunlight, and then I can just rotate this sunlight, bring it up and rotate it, rotate it over something like that, and then we can just go back into the camera view to preview that. So if you click on the light, you can go over here to the light settings. Now on the strength here, I'm going to set this probably to like a 3, so it's a bit brighter, maybe even set it to like a 4. Now this does look too bright right now, but that is because this is a white material, and so it is reflecting the light. But when we add colors to these materials, then it will be less bright. Now you can see right here that the shadow is very sharp, and I don't really want it to be that sharp. So on the light settings here, I'm going to turn this angle up a little bit just so that those shadows are a bit smoother. All right, so now we can set up the materials. So I'm first going to select the plane here, and I'm going to go over here to the material properties, and let's just click on new. And I can just call this ground. And then for this material, the base color, I'm going to set this to kind of a blue color. I just think this looks pretty nice. And then maybe make it a little bit darker. And then also, I think it looks very nice if the roughness is turned down. So I'm just going to turn this roughness value down. And that way you can see a bit of a reflection in the ground. And I think it does look pretty nice. And then let's just select one of these planks here, and I'm going to click on new, and I can just call this planks. Now for this material, I do want to do a very simple node setup, so I'm going to click right over here to the shading tab. And then let's just go back into the camera view, and then I can just go into the rendered view to preview this. So what I want to do is I want to have each plank be a slightly different color, and that way you'll be able to tell them apart, because right now they're so close to each other that they kind of just look like one piece. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for an object info node, and I'm just going to drop the object info right here. And then I'll take the random, and I'm going to put the random into the base color. So what the random is going to do is it's going to randomly generate colors per object. Now you can't really see it doing anything, and that is because this object only has this material. So I need to add the planks material to all the other planks. So I'm going to go into the wireframe view, and then I'm just going to box select all of the other planks, just like that, so we have them all selected. And then lastly, I'm going to shift and select this plank right here. So this one has the planks material. So in the 3D view, I can now press Ctrl L, and I want to click on link materials. And that way, when I go into rendered mode, you can see that they now all have the same material. So now you can see what the random value is doing. It's giving all the objects randomly generated colors from white to black. Now I don't want white and black, I want it to kind of look like wood. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node. Let's just drop the color ramp node right in here. So I can now change these colors, and it'll change the different colors on the planks. So this black tab here, I'm going to click on the minus just to get rid of it. And then I'm going to take the white tab, and I'm going to make it a light brown color so that it looks like a plank material. And then I want to make another one. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and click, and that's going to add another tab, and I'm just going to drag this tab over here. Now this one, I want it to be very similar, but I'm going to make it slightly more saturated and slightly darker. And you can now start to see what it's doing. So each plank just has a slightly different color. So now you can tell them apart. All right, so let's go back over to the layout here, and then I'm going to press Control S to save our project. So now we can go ahead and make those cannons. So to make the cannons, I'm going to press Shift C, and that is going to center the 3D cursor in the center of our view. And I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here, and I'm going to add a cylinder. I'm going to press period on the numpad to zoom into the cylinder, and then I'll press S to scale, and I do want to scale it up a bit, so something like that. And then I can press G to grab, Z on the Z axis, and I'm just going to bring this up just so that it's right above the plane, something like that. All right, that is very good. So I'll now select the cylinder and tab into edit mode, and I want to press 3 on the top of your keyboard, or just click right up here to the face select. I can now select this face, and I want to press G and Z, and we're just going to bring this up a little bit. Now when we do the materials for the tanks, I do want to add a colored stripe, so I'm going to press Ctrl R and then scroll my mouse wheel out, and then I can just left click and then right click, and that way we can add a stripe onto the object. And then I want to add some bevels so that it looks a little bit more realistic and reflects some of the light. So I'm going to click right here to the vertex select, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select this ring of vertices. I can now press Ctrl B and Control B is going to add a bevel, and I can scroll my mouse wheel out just to make 2, and then I can just click to place that. So now there's just a tiny little bevel there, but that will just help to make it look more realistic. And then I'm going to go down here and Alt select this ring of vertices, and again I'll press Control B and then just click to place that. All right, that is good. So I can now, with the object context menu, shade this object smooth, and you can see now there's just a little bit of a reflection there on the edge, and that does make it look more realistic. So I now want to add some little legs to the bottom of the cannons. So again, I'll press Shift C just to make sure my 3D cursor is still in the center right there. And then I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to add a cube. So I can now tab into edit mode on the cube, and I want to press G to grab, click and hold with my mouse wheel just to bring it over, and then I can press S to scale and just scale it out a little bit, and then I can press G and Z, and we just want to bring it up. If I go down under the plane, we just want to bring it up so it's just above the plane a little bit. And then also just make sure that it's inside the side of the cannon, just like that. All right, I now want to select this and then shift select this vertice, and I want to press Control B to add a bevel, and then I want to scroll my mouse wheel so that there is only one face, and then just click to place that. All right, that is looking good. So I can now double tap the A key to select everything, and I want to press Control B again, and I'm just going to scroll my mouse wheel up once just to add a tiny little bevel, and then just click to place that. All right, and then back in object mode, I can shade the object smooth. So now I want this to be all around the other sides. So I'm going to go right over here to the modifier properties, and I can click on add modifier, and I want to add the mirror modifier. And that way, if you click on the X here, it's going to mirror it over on the X axis. And then I want to apply this. So I'm going to click right here on the drop down and click on apply. And then I want to duplicate this over so it's on the other side. So I'll press Shift D and then R to rotate, and then Z on the Z axis, and then I want to type in 9, 0, and enter, and that way we've duplicated it and moved it around. And then I want to shift and select all of these objects, but then lastly I want to shift select this one right here, so the base of our cannon, and I want to join these all together into one object. So I will now press Control J, and now these are all one object. Let's just press Control S again to save. All right, so that is the base for our cannon, but I want to make the head of the cannon. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I want to hold down the Alt key and select this loop right here. So I can now press Shift D to duplicate, Z, and just bring it up on the Z axis, and then just click to place that. So now I want to separate this into its own object. So to separate it, I'm going to press P, and then I'm going to click on selection. So everything that's selected, it will now be its own object. So I can just go back into object mode, select this object, and tab into edit mode. And then I'll just press A to select everything, and I can press G and Z, and we're just going to bring it down just so that it's a little bit above the base of the cannon. And then I want to fill this, so I'll press F to fill a face right there. I can now press E to extrude. We're going to bring that up a little bit, and then just click to place that, something like that. You can also press 1 or 3 to go to side view, 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I can now press G and Z, and we can just bring that up a little bit more, something like that. All right, so let's press E to extrude, click to place that, S to scale, and then E to extrude, and then S to scale, maybe G and Z, we're going to bring that down a little bit, then E to extrude and S to scale. Okay, something like that. So that is looking pretty good, but it is kind of rough and I want to smooth it out. So I'm going to click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the subdivision surface modifier. And then I want to change the levels viewport and render both to 1. So there's just a little bit of subdivision. And then again, using the object context menu, I can shade the object smooth. Now, because there aren't very many vertices down here, it's kind of stretching it. So in edit mode, I'm going to Alt select this bottom ring of vertices, and I'm going to press Control B to again add a manual bevel, and I'll just hold down the Shift key to make my movements very sensitive and just add a tiny little bevel and then click to place that. All right, that is looking very good. And then I also, in edit mode, I want to press Control R and then click and drag up and click to place that, just so that that's a little bit sharper. So that is very good. So now what we need to do is we need to create the cannon coming out of the cannon head. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here and add another cylinder, and then I'll press G to grab. And then before I move the cylinder, I'm going to click right behind me on the add cylinder settings, and I'm going to change the vertice count to 12 because we don't need 32. That's a little bit high. So I can now close the add cylinder settings, and I can press G and Z. We're going to bring it up, and then G to grab, click with your middle mouse wheel and just bring it over. So I can now press R to rotate, and we're going to press X on the X-axis, and I can type in 9, 0, and enter just to rotate it over. And then I can also scale it up. So I'll now tab into edit mode, and I want to scale it on the X-axis. Actually, I want to scale it on the Y-axis and just bring that out, and then just kind of move it down in object mode, just like that. All right, now I actually want these two objects to be connected. So I'm going to click on this object and then shift click on this object. So now that these are both selected, but this one is the last one that's selected, I can press Control J, and that way this object is going to become a part of this object. Now, because this object has the subdivision surface, you can see that it's smoothing this out. And I also want to use the object context menu again to shade this smooth. But because there's so little topology right here, this is just one big face, it is stretching it a lot. So what I want to do is I want to press 3 to go to the face select, and then I just want to select this front face right here. I can now press I, and I is going to inset the face, and I'm just going to inset it a little bit, just like that, and then I'll press E to extrude, and I want to extrude this way back inside the head of the cannon. And then if we go inside here, there are faces right here, and I actually don't want these faces, so I will press X to delete, and I can just click on faces. And then right here, there is another face. If I just go 3 for the face select, you can see there is the face. So I'll just press X to delete, and I want to delete faces. So now there's no stretching, it just ends at the end of the vertices. All right, that is pretty good. Although you can see there's a bit of a stretching right here. So I'm going to press Control R, click and add a loop cut, and just drop the loop cut right here, and then Control R, and we're going to add another loop cut right here, and then just click and drag and drop it right there. So it's pretty close. All right, that is very good. So we now have our little cannon. So let's add the materials to our cannon. So I'm going to click on the cannon, and I can also just go down into the material preview, and I'm going to click right over here onto the material properties. I can now click on new, and I can just call this metal. I'm just going to call it metal. So the base color, I want that to be kind of a gray color. Of course, you can do whatever color you want. And then to make it look like a metallic material, I'm going to turn the metallic value all the way to 1, and then I do want it to be a little bit more shiny, so I'll turn the roughness down just a little bit. And that is looking pretty good in the rendered view. So I now want to select this bottom part, and I'm going to click on the drop down right here, and I want to add the metal material as well. All right, so that is looking very good. But as I talked about earlier in this tutorial, I do want to add a color here. So in edit mode on this object, you can see right over here on the material properties, we have these different material slots. So I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new material. And then I actually want to add the metal material into this slot. So right now we have 2 of the same material in the material slot on this object, but I now want to duplicate this material, and then I can change it and make it a different color. So I am going to click on this button right here, and that is going to duplicate the material, and I can now rename this to blue because I want to make it a blue color. So now on the base color right down here, instead of turning it to a gray color, I want to turn it to a bright blue color, just like that. All right, so now I want to assign this blue color to the object right here. So I am going to click right up here to the face select, and then I can hold down the Alt key, and I just want to Alt and select this ring of vertices. And also I want to press G and Z and just kind of bring it up a little bit. So now that it's selected, I can just select the blue material, and then I can click on assign in the edit mode. And now you can see that it has that blue stripe, and you can tell what team it's on. Of course, you can change it to whatever color you want. All right, so that is looking very good. Now there's just a couple more things I want to do to this tank. If I select the head, you can see that the origin point is way down here. And this is going to cause a lot of problems when we do the simulation, because it's going to rotate by the origin point, and the origin point is way down here, and that is not what I want. So I want to set the origin point right up here. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select this ring of vertices. So I want to set the origin point into the very center of these faces. To do that, I'm going to press Shift S, and I'm going to move my mouse down, and I want to center the cursor to the selected area. So now that I've clicked on that, you can see that the 3D cursor is in the very center of these faces. So I can now tab back into object mode, and then to center the origin to the cursor, I can click on Object, and I want to click on Set Origin, and then I can click on Origin to 3D Cursor. So now if I rotate this, you can see it's rotating from the center, and also we can animate the tank by pressing R to rotate, and Z on the Z-axis, and just rotate that, and that way it'll swivel the cannon. Now we do also want to add some physics to these as well, because we do want the cannon to fall over if the ball smashes it. So I'm going to go right over here to the physics properties, and then on both of these objects I want to add the rigid body. Now this top one right up here, we are going to be animating this, so I want to turn on the animated button right here. And then if I click on this bottom one right here, I'm going to click on the rigid body as well, but this one I'm not going to animate it, so I will not turn on the animated button. And then the last thing that I want to do to this cannon head is I want to add some shape keys, and I want to make it look like the cannon head is shooting, so it's going to kind of go back and then go forward. So we're going to use shape keys to do that. So to add shape keys, I'm going to click right over here on the object data properties, and then just open up this shape keys tab right here. So I'm now going to click on the plus to add a shape key, and the first one here is just the basis. So we want to leave everything how it is. Now I want to click on the plus again, and it's going to add key 1. So key 1 is going to be the first key, and that's the only one we're going to use. So make sure the key 1 is selected just by clicking on key 1, and then I'm going to tab into edit mode. I now want to press A to deselect everything, and then I'm going to hover my mouse over the cannon, and I'll press L, and that is going to select all of the linked vertices. So I can now press G to grab, click with your middle mouse wheel to constrain it, and I'm just going to bring it back just like that, and then click to place that. So if I now tab back into object mode, you can see it kind of goes back, but if you click on this key 1, you can change this value right here, and that is going to make the cannon look like it's shooting. All right, and that is it. So let's just press Control S again to save. So I now want to select this and then Shift select this, and I can press G to grab, click and hold with your mouse wheel, and then G and Z, we're going to bring it up. And then you can also press S to scale because it is a little bit too big right now, and I don't want it to be quite that big. And then I can just bring it down here, and I do want to bring it just above the top of the pillar. So I don't want it to be going through, because if it's going through, then it's going to cause issues with the rigid body physics. So just something like that, you can just go inside here and make sure it's not going through. So just something like that is very good. So I now want to select this one and then Shift select the bottom one, and I want to duplicate them and move them over to make the other cannon. So I will press Shift D, click and hold with my mouse wheel, and I'm just going to move this all the way over to the other side. And then I do want to rotate this over so it's facing the other cannon, so I'll rotate this over on the Z-axis, and I'll rotate it over by 180 degrees. So I'm going to type in 180 and enter, so it's facing the other cannon. And then this one, this is on the blue team, so I want this to be on the red team. Of course, you can make whatever colors you want, but I'm going to make this on the red team. So I'm going to click right over here on the material properties, and I'm going to make sure the blue is selected. I can now click on this button right here, and that is going to duplicate the material, and I can now just call this red. So now that that material is separate from this one, we can change it, and it's not going to affect the other tank. So on the base color here, I can just make this a bright red color, something like that. All right, so we now have the blue team and the red team. So now let's go ahead and create the bullets. So I'm going to press Shift A, and for the bullets, I am just going to use a UV sphere. So I'll bring the UV sphere up, and I'm going to also, with the object context menu, shade it smooth. Now this first one here, I'm going to click on the drop down, and I'm going to add the blue color because I want it to be the bullet for this blue team. So I can now press 1 to go to front view, and I'm going to press Z and move my mouse over to go into the wireframe view. So I want to zoom in here, and I want to scale this down and move it into place because I don't want the bullet to be bigger than the cannon, because that wouldn't make any sense. It has to fit through the cannon, so that way I can see that it's the correct size. Now I also want to press G to grab, click with my middle mouse wheel, and I actually want to put this inside the head of the cannon. And this way we can animate it shooting out of the cannon head, but you won't be able to see it before it shoots. Now I need to give this object physics as well, so let's click right over here on the physics panel, and I'm going to add rigid body. Now again, this one is going to be animated, so I want to turn on the animated button right here. And then also the bullets need to be very heavy, and that way they will have momentum to push over the towers. So I'm going to change the mass here on this bullet to 20. So I think 20 works pretty good. You can play around with it and change it to whatever you want. If you want the bullets to be much more weak, you could turn it down to maybe just like 5 or 10. I'm going to change it to 20 because I think that works pretty well. All right, so that is very good. Now let's also press Shift D, and I'm going to click and hold with my mouse wheel, and we're just going to push this other bullet into the head of this one. And then this one is on the red team, so I want the bullet to be red as well. So I'm going to click right back over here on the material properties, and I'm going to click on the drop down, and I want to change it from blue to red. So now you can see that this bullet is red. All right, let's press Ctrl S again to save. All right, so we are now ready to do the animation. So you can change the animation to whatever length that you want, but I know that I want my animation to be around 400 frames. So right here on the end frame, I'm going to set this to 400 and then just hit enter, just because I like 400 frames. All right, so the first thing that we need to animate is the heads rotating, and then after that, we're going to animate the bullets. So let's just go into the camera view, and if you press the space bar to play the animation, you can see that these just fall through the ground, and that is because we haven't set up the rigid body for the ground. So just click over on the rigid body properties, and I'm going to click on rigid body, and then this plane is not going to move at all, so I want to change it from active to passive. Now if I click on the space bar, you can see that everything just sits there. So let's animate the cannon heads rotating. So I'm going to click on this one, and then we can just play this and just start to play it. So I want the cannon head to start rotating somewhere around here, kind of at the starting. So what I'm going to do is turn on the auto keying, and that way it's going to automatically add keyframes when we move the objects. So I can now just press R to rotate and then just click and place it exactly where it is, and you can see it's going to add a little diamond there, and that is a keyframe on the timeline. So I can now just play this, go a little bit farther, kind of to over here, and I can just press R to rotate, Z on the Z axis, and just kind of rotate it over like that. And then I want to press the space bar and just move it over a little bit more. And then I can click on this keyframe right here, and I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and I want to drop it over here. And that way now you can see that the cannon head just kind of rotates and then rotates back. So now I want the cannon head to shoot kind of about here. So what we need to do is we need to animate the shape keys. So to animate the shape keys, just make sure this object is selected, and I'm going to click right over here on the object data properties. And then right here we have key 1. So this is what we need to animate. So I want the cannon to shoot right here, right after it turns. So I'm going to hover my mouse over this value, and I'm going to press I, and I is going to add a keyframe. Now I am going to use my arrow keys, and I'm going to move over by 3. So just zoom in here and move over by 3. And then I'm going to change this value to 1, and that way the cannon is going to go in. And then because we have the auto keying on, it automatically added a keyframe. And then using the arrow keys, you can jump ahead 3 more keyframes, and I'm going to bring the value down so it's back to 0, and then it automatically added a keyframe. So now if I play through this, you can see the cannon just shoots. So now let's go into the wireframe view, and I'm just going to select the bullet, and then I can press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. So now just play through this and make sure that you're right at the spot where the cannon shoots. So I will press G to grab, and then just click to place the bullet right there in the center. And then I'm going to move over just a little bit, kind of till right at the end after the cannon has shot, and then I'm going to press G to grab, click and hold with my middle mouse wheel, and I'll just bring it out a little bit to something like that. Now if you click right back over here onto the physics properties, you can see that we still have the animated value turned on. Now we want to animate the animated value turning off, because what we want to do is we want to first have it be shot out, and so we want it to use the keyframes, but then right when it's reached the endpoint right here, we want it to stop using the keyframes and use the rigid body instead. So right over here on this frame where the keyframe is, the last keyframe, I'm going to hover my mouse over the animated value, and I'm going to press I, and that will insert a keyframe. I now want to use my arrow key and just hop forward 1 frame. So now what I want to do is uncheck this, and then because we have the auto key turned on, it's automatically adding a keyframe. So on this keyframe, the animated is still turned on, but then this keyframe, the animated is turned off. And this way, the bullet can still be animated, but then right here, when the animation is finished, it will turn back into physics, and it will then act with all the other physics. Now we do have one problem with this, and that is it starts to speed up, but then it starts to slow down at the end. And so if we have it like this, speed up and then slow down, then the ball will just kind of drop down and it won't really have any momentum. And so what I want to do is I want to change the keyframe interpolation to linear, and that way it'll be a consistent speed. So to do this, just press A couple of times in the timeline to make sure all of the keyframes are selected. I can now press T, and T is going to bring up the keyframe interpolation. So right now the default is set to Bezier, and you can see it kind of has a little icon here where it slowly speeds up and then slowly slows back down. But I want to change this to linear, and that way it's not going to speed up or slow down. It's just going to go from this keyframe to the next keyframe, and then the next keyframe after that it'll turn back into the rigid body settings. So that is it. That is how you animate the bullet. It might seem a little bit complicated, but after you've done it a few times, it actually gets pretty easy. So now what I want to do is I want to bake the simulation. Now, if you have just a small little simulation like this, you can just play it and it might keep up, but probably it's going to fall behind. So to bake the simulation, I am going to actually split this window. So I'm going to hover my mouse right here and I'm going to click and then drag down, and this will split the window. And then also I can get rid of this top window right here because I don't really need it. Now this top window right here, it's the same thing, but I want to click right over here onto the scene properties. And then you can just open up the rigid body world. So we can just leave the rigid body world settings right up here, and then the other settings can be down here because we are going to need to bake this multiple times to get it correct. So I'm going to click on the cache right here, and this will open up the cache settings so that we can bake the simulation. Now the end is at 400, so I'm going to change the simulation end to 400. Of course, you can change it to whatever you want. And the animation looks good, so let's just press Ctrl S to save. And then also, you can change the simulation speed. Now I think the default does look pretty good at 1, but if you want the simulation to go faster, you can turn it up to like a 1.5 or even 2. Or if you want the simulation to be very slow, you could turn it down to like a 0.5 or a 0.3 or something like that. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now, but you can play around with this. So now let's click on bake, and because this is kind of a small simulation, it won't take very long. And as the 3D scene gets more and more complex, it will take longer to bake. But in this case, it baked really fast. So now let's just play through this and see what it looks like. So you can see that he kind of looks and he looks back and then he shoots. And there we go. So the cannon is smashed off. Now I don't really want it to hit the cannon. I want it to hit the tower instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bullet. And what I want to do right over here, here is the bullet animation. I want to make the bullet a little bit slower, and that way the bullet will go down a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is press B for the box select in the timeline, and I'm going to box select these keyframes right here. I can now press G to grab, and I'm just going to move them over 2 keyframes. And that way it'll just make the bullet a little bit slower, and that way it'll fall down a little bit more, and that way it will hopefully hit the tower right here instead of up here. So we need to now rebake this, so I'm going to click on delete bake, and then I can click on bake again. And again, it doesn't really take very long for me because this is kind of simple, but if you have a really big scene with lots of animation, then it will take longer. All right, so let's just play through this, and you can see something is definitely wrong here. So you can see that there's a bunch of little glitches right here, and there are a few reasons why this might happen. So one reason why this might happen is because there are overlapping objects. So if you press 3 to go to the side view, you can look up really close and just make sure that these objects are not overlapping. Now, if they are a little bit too close, you can tab into edit mode, and then you can go over into the wireframe view, and then you can box select some of these pieces just the bottom pieces right here, and you can press G to grab and Z on the Z axis and just move it up a little bit, and that way it'll just have a little bit more space. So just look over on side view and just make sure that your object isn't overlapping at all. You can see there's just a tiny little gap right there and there, so that looks good. And then right over on this one, just make sure that there is a little gap. Now the other thing that we can do is we can turn on the animated values on the bottom parts of the cannons. But then right before the bullet hits the tower, we can turn the animated value off, and so it'll use the rigid body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this one here, and I'm going to turn on the animated value, and then I'm just going to wait and see when the bullet is about to hit the tower. So right here on this keyframe, I'm going to press I on the animated value. Then I'm going to use my arrow keys and move over by 1 frame. Then I can click to turn this off, and again, because we have the auto key on, it's going to turn it off and add a keyframe. So now I can just delete this and bake it again. And now if I play through this, you can see that it's not moving until right before the bullet hits it. So I do want this cannon to shoot as well. So I'm going to go right back over here more towards the starting, and I'm going to kind of have the cannon rotating around. So I'm going to press R to rotate and then click to place that. Then I'll move over a little bit and I can press R and then Z and just kind of rotate that over, and then just move over a little bit farther, and I want to rotate this over. So let me just go to top view by pressing 7 on the numpad, and I want this cannon to kind of shoot a bullet right over here. So I'm going to press R to rotate, and I'm just going to rotate this cannon over and just rotate the cannon head until it's facing the side of this other tower. So now I want to animate the shape keys. So let's click right back over here to the object data properties, and we have the shape keys right here. So I'm just going to go to the end here right when it stops moving, and on the value here on key 1, I'm going to press I to add a keyframe, and then again using my arrow keys, I can move over 3 frames, and then I can change the value to 1 and it'll add a keyframe, and then I can move 3 frames over and again change the value back to 0. So now what I want to do is go into wireframe, and I want to select the sphere, and I'll also press 7 to go to top view, and we can now animate the bullet. So I'm just going to move back kind of right here, and I'm going to press G to grab and then just click to place it so it's right in the center there, and we now have a keyframe there. So I can now just move to the end till after the cannon has shot, and I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm just going to move this bullet out right about there. Just try to aim it at the tower wherever you want it. And then again, we need to have this be animated, but then we need the animated value to turn off. So to do this, just click back over on the physics properties, and right at the very end here, while the bullet is still moving on the last keyframe, I want to press I, and that way it'll add a keyframe on the animated value. Then I can use my arrow keys, and I'm just going to move forward by 1 frame, and then I can turn the animated value off, and again, it's going to add another keyframe right there. And then again, this is slowing down because the default is Bezier. So what I want to do is just press A to make sure all the keyframes are selected, and I'm going to press T, and then I want to again change this to linear instead of Bezier. And that way it'll be a consistent speed from the first keyframe to the second keyframe. So right back over here on the bake settings, I'm just going to click on delete bake, and then I'll bake this again. And there we go. So let's just watch through this. That looks pretty cool. Now you can see that it didn't really take down all of the tower, it just took down a little bit of it. So I want this one right here, I want this one to shoot a second bullet. So what I'll do is I'll click on the bullet right here on the blue cannon, and I will press 7 to go to top view. And then let's go into rendered mode and just kind of zoom in here to the starting. So I can now press Shift D to duplicate, and then I'm just going to right click to hop it back to its default position. And then because we already animated the keyframes, I can press A to select all the keyframes, and I can press G to grab and just kind of move them over here. So I can now just play through this and figure out where I want the second bullet to start. So I want the second bullet to start probably around here. So I will just press G to grab, and I'm just going to move the keyframes over just like that. And then I'm going to click on this cannon right here, and we already have the keyframes of the cannon shooting, and they are right here. So what I can do is I can just box select these right here, and I can press Shift D to duplicate, and I can just move them over, and then I can just find where the second bullet shoots. So here's the second bullet, and you can see that it shoots right about here. So I'm going to press G to grab and just kind of move this over so it looks like it's shooting the second bullet. And of course, if you want to rotate this again, you can, so you can add more keyframes and have it rotate as well. So now we have 2 bullets, so I'm just going to click on delete bake, and then we'll bake this again. And here's the second bullet, but you can see the second bullet is at the same exact location, and what I want is I want the second bullet to be a little bit slower, and that way it'll hit the tower tower down here. So what I'm going to do is just select the second bullet, and then right over here on the keyframes, I'm going to box select the last 2 keyframes. I can now press G to grab, and I'm just going to move them over by 2 keyframes, and that way it's just going to be a little bit slower. So again, I can click on delete bake, and then I can bake this again. And now we can just play through this, and there's the first one. You can see the second one is a little bit slower. So because this was a little bit slower, it's going to hit this at a lower spot. So let's just animate this one more time. So I'm going to add one more bullet, and we'll have the other bullet hit right here. But before we animate the bullet, I want the cannon head to rotate, and that way it'll hit the side of the tower. So I'm going to press 7 for top view, and I want to kind of move it over here, and then I'm going to press R to rotate, and then just click to place it so it stays back at its default position. And then I can just move over a little bit, maybe to over here, and I can press R to rotate, and I'm just going to rotate it over slightly so that the bullet will shoot right over here. So again, I can go all the way back to the starting, and I'm going to go into wireframe view, and then I just want to select one of these bullets. I'll now press Shift D to duplicate the bullet, and then just right click so it hops back to its default position. Now we already have the keyframe. You can see there's the keyframe right here. So I can press G to grab, and I'm just going to move the keyframe over, and then I'm going to figure out where I want it to be. So I want it to start right about here. So I'll press G to grab, stick it right there. But you can see that this bullet has been animated to go forward, and I want this bullet to instead go sideways. So to fix this, I'm going to move my blue line right over here to the second last keyframe. So these 2 keyframes are the keyframe in between where the bullet is shooting, and then the last keyframe here is the animated value turning off. So I'm going to move right over here, and then if I make a new keyframe, it's going to override the previous keyframe. So I can press G to grab, and I can just move it over just like that. So now if I play through this, you can see it's shooting sideways. And then again, we do want this cannon head to look like it's shooting. So if I move right over here, you can see here's the animation of the shape keys. So I'm going to box select these keyframes, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to bring it over here. And again, we need to find the spot where the third one shoots. So right about here. So I can press G to grab and just move the keyframes so that it's synced up with the last bullet shooting. All right, that looks pretty good. So once again, we need to click on delete bake and then bake it one more time. All right, so this is looking pretty good, but there is one more thing that we need to do. This object here, we have the animated turned on because the object is being animated and it's moving around. But I don't want it to be animated right at this point, right before the first bullet will hit the tower. So what we need to do is, again, just animate the animated value turning off. So I'm just going to move right here, right before the bullet hits the tower, and I'm going to press I to add a keyframe on this object on the animated value. Then I can use my arrow key to just go over by 1 frame, and I can turn off the animated value, and then again I'll press I to insert a keyframe, and we have the auto key on, so it actually already added a keyframe. So I can just delete the bake and then bake it one more time. And there we go. So you can see now that is working just like we want. All right, so that is finished. Now, if you wanted to, you could bake the object to keyframes, but I found that you really don't have to bake the object to keyframes. If the bake looks correct, then it should render just fine. What I want to do though is I want the camera to move throughout the simulation. So I'm going to go into the camera view by pressing 0 on the numpad, and then I'm going to select the camera. I can now press G to grab and then click to place it, and that's going to add a keyframe on frame 0. So I can now move all the way over to the 400th frame, just go to frame 400, and I can now just move to wherever I want the camera to be. So I want the camera to be somewhere around here. I can now press Control Alt Numpad 0, and that is going to hop the camera to where we are, and you can see it's also added a keyframe. Now the problem with this is that the camera starts to slow up and then kind of slows back down, and I don't really want this. I want the camera to play at a consistent speed. So I am going to select the camera, and then right here just press A to make sure the keyframes are selected, and then I'm going to press T, and I want to click on linear so that way the camera moves at a consistent speed. All right, and there we go. So I can just play through the animation, and I do think that looks pretty good. Now, if you want to switch your camera angle during your animation, I have a tutorial on that. It's a tutorial on how to switch different camera angles throughout an animation. So I'll have a card right up there on the screen and a link in the description if you'd like to check out that tutorial. So we can now do the render settings and render these all out to images. And then we will throw throw the images into Blender's video editor and video edit together the final video. So let's click right up here on the render properties. Now the render samples, I'm just going to change this down to like a 20 because I don't actually need that many samples because there aren't very many complex materials. Now, if you want the render to go faster, you could definitely use Blender Eevee. So Blender Eevee is a real-time render engine, so it renders much faster than Cycles, but as you can see, Eevee does not look nearly as realistic as Cycles, so I will be using the Cycles render engine, but you could totally use Eevee if you want to. And then to make the render even faster, I'm going to open up the light paths, and I'm going to turn most of the light paths off. So the max bounces, I'm going to turn the total to 2, the diffuse to 2, the glossy to 2, and then everything else can actually be turned to 0. So transparency, transmission, the indirect light, and also the filter gloss, and both of the caustics, we can all turn those down to 0, and you can see it actually doesn't look any different in the rendered view, but it will render much faster. And then one last thing that I want to do to make each frame look really nice, I want to add a denoise in Blender's Compositor. So if you go over to Blender's Compositing tab, you can click on Use Nodes, and this is going to use the compositing nodes. Now right in here, I want to press Shift A, and I want to search for the denoise node, and I'm just going to drop the denoise node right in there. And this way, when we render the frames, it'll use that denoise node and denoise the image and make it nice and smooth. So I can just press F12 and we can render out a preview render. And you can see it's rendering and it's not taking my computer very long. And you can see it was kind of grainy, but then it activated the denoise and that looks much smoother now. So now we just need to set an output for our images. So I'm going to go right over here to the output properties. And then right down here under output, I need to set an output for the images. So I'm going to click on this file icon. And then I've made a folder on my computer called images, and I'm just going to click on accept. Now you should definitely set the file format to an image format, but I'm going to use the JPEG instead of PNG because JPEG images are lower file size. And then I'll also set the quality to 100. And then before you render all the images, one other thing you can do to make them look a bit more realistic is if you go right up here to the render properties, you can turn on the motion blur. So the motion blur is really going to help to make it look more realistic because things that are moving, it will be blurred just a little. Alright, so let's just press Ctrl S again to save, and then I'm just going to click on render, and I'm going to click on render animation, and that way it'll render out all the images to the folder. Alright, and it just finished. So I'm just going to press Ctrl S again to save, and then let's click on file, and I'm just going to click on new to open up a new general. So now that we've opened up a new Blender file, I'm going to click over on the video editing tab. Now if you don't have this video editing tab, you can click on the plus here, and then you can go down to video editing and open up the video editing. So right down here on the timeline, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go down here to image sequence. And then here's the folder where I rendered out all the images to. So I'm just going to press A to select everything, and then I can click on add image strip. Alright, and there we go. So there is the final animation. Now, if you want to add music and sound effects, that would definitely help. I won't be adding any music and sound effects though in this tutorial just because I want to focus on the physics simulation, but it's really easy just to drag and drop sound effects into Blender's video editor. So now let's render this out to a final video. So to render it out to a final video, I'm going to go right down here to the output settings, and I'm just going to save mine out to the desktop as like final video, something like that. And then the file format, I want to change this to FFmpeg video. Now, if I go right down here and open up the encoding, I like to use a container of MPEG-4. And then if you open up the video, I like to use a video codec of H.264, and then I just leave this at medium quality and good. And then if you have any audio, I like to use the AAC audio format, or you can just click on no audio if you don't have any audio. So then just make sure your end frame is at the end, and you can just save this file if you'd like, and then you can just go right up here to render, and you can render out the final animation. And there we go. So there is the final animation. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you learned a lot as well. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel, some great places to do that are on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I will have links in the description. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in a future tutorial.